When we're drawing portraits, we're not just copying what we see. We're simplifying, organizing, and interpreting. We use visual shapes and rhythms to help us manage the complexity of the head. And one of those shapes that's very similar to the Van Dyke Z that I talked about a few months ago on the channel is something that is called the elastic X. This shape stretches from the outside corners of the eyes down to the wings of the nose and out to the corners of the mouth. It's very flexible, it changes with the tilt and turn of the head, and it helps me to triangulate the facial features with way more accuracy. In drawing, we really want to move beyond the standard textbook proportions, you know, the ones that only really work if the head is right in front of you and it's straight front facing, like an eye is this point to this eye and this eye to this eye. What we need are visual concepts that really help us to draw the head from any angle, under any lighting, What we need are visual concepts that help us to draw the head from any angle, under any lighting, with real structure. The elastic X is one of those concepts that make us see the face just like a chess master sees the board. Not just isolated pieces and features, but as a dynamic system of relationships. This X becomes a mental framework. We're seeing the entire board as a chess player would see it. In this video, I'll show you some examples of how this shape shows up in a number of old masters' works, so you can start to recognize this from the model no matter what the pose or the angle is. So let's talk about the elastic X. I'm gonna go over some other concepts that I've talked about on the channel before, mostly the cam system and the Van Dyke Z. Now to get to the elastic X, we have to start with the cam system, just kind of compose where our drawing is gonna be in comparison to the model on our paper here. Go over, I'm using Procreate, and I have a new layer so that I can draw on top of our model here, Van Dyke. I'm using my Derwent pencil and my Derwent eraser. I'm gonna use basically two colors. I'm gonna use a bright red when I'm talking about how the X in the geometry overlays our model, as well as a brown, which is going to be my sketching color. Great, so we want to think first about how are we going to kind of establish our drawing onto our paper. And so we use the CAM method for that, which stands for compose, anchor, and measure out. So we want to think about the top of the head. We want to compose him on here. I'm going to use an opacity, probably, I don't know, like probably in the 40s to 50s for opacity. And I bring my size of my pencil all the way up so that it can shift. If you look right here, see this is really big. And then as I tilt my pencil, you can see it shrinks down and gets a little smaller. We're going to start with the top of the head. Now I'm using kind of a smaller, hopefully you guys will be able to see the cursor as I'm going through here. Coming up to the top of the head, where I think the chin is going to be. Looks pretty good. Kind of where's the collar. Now kind of composing him on here. What's the kind of verticals that are happening around here, over on this side, and just composing where I want him to kind of sit on the paper next door to our model. And this might be correct, it might not be. I just kind of want to get a rough outline of where the head is going to sit within the space. That's my composition I'm composing right now. Now, I want to find an anchor point, and so my anchor point within the portrait is usually the eyes, so that's the A within CAM, CAM. Thinking about the eyes here on our model, thinking about where they kind of line up over here, so I'm thinking right around there is pretty good, and it's a decent line for the brow ridge and everything. Where's that kind of the bottom part of the orbital cavity, and I'm kind of squinting, and I'm thinking around here. So that's all kind of guesstimates. But the guesstimate becomes our anchor. So what does that mean? The anchor is going to be something that we're going to measure out from and use as our kind of guidepost for measuring, right? So coming into the center point of where the glabella would be, and just really squinting and simplifying what the entire orbital cavity would be. I'm going to lighten this up just a little bit. And just kind of sit and block that in. Going to jump to the other side, and this looks pretty good. Jumping over here. So my first point is to think about the simplicity of the light and dark patterns within the model, right? I'm not worried about eyes, nose, mouth, or anything like that comes within a feature of what we're drawing. I want to think about shapes. Sculptural, large masses that are on the page to begin with. So once we kind of establish a basic idea of where these orbital cavities are, right within this space. Very, very simple, very, very basic. Now I want to think about the Van Dyke Z. So talked about this in an earlier video. It's kind of fun that we're using Van Dyke here as our model. And so the Van Dyke Z is, I'm going to switch to a bright red so that you guys can see what it is I'm drawing. And so the Van Dyke Z, it starts on one end of the brow ridge, cuts to the middle point. I'm going to draw that a little better here, to where it meets the nose. And it's pretty much, we want to follow the length of the upper part of the brow ridge, right? So that's the bone of the portion of the face over the orbital cavity. And now we want to take this down, this line, and sketch that out over to the length of the nose. And then we think about how the form shadow is pulling. If you guys look, I'm trying to make my cursor a little bigger here. See the shadow underneath the nose? Well, there's the light side of the nose, then there's the shadow side of the nose. We want to draw a straight line as best we can because we're simplifying. These lines can get more intricate as we go and become smaller lines, but for now we're thinking large masses and measuring points to make it easier for ourselves to draw on our side. So thinking about this shape right there. So that develops our Van Dyke Z. I'll draw it up here in a little corner over here where our shape is pretty much a space from here to here. It gets to that nose, what's that length? And so we can kind of almost mimic this shape right here. And it cuts in a little bit more like that. So that you can see how that looks essentially similar to a Z. And so we're really interested in understanding the angles of this top line as well as its length, the length of this line and the tilt angle, and the length of this line and its tilt angle. Making sure I'm on another layer. Cool. So that kind of gives you guys an idea of what the Z is. How do we use that within our own drawing? Is we want to find this edge, this shape from this distance to this distance on our model now. Going to switch back to our red sketching line. And so we think about, I'm going to do this on another layer completely so that we keep this layer intact for our geometry. Come into the side of our head. I'm going to make this just a little lighter here. We got this side. We got this angle that comes to about here, right? That looks pretty good. Follow the length of the nose to about there. And then we cut across to about there. And then we think about how that's the wing of the nostril. And that kind of gives us our Z shape. Hopefully similar to our Z shape here. Right, so that helps us to kind of have an underplane for we know where this part of the philtrum is going to be for the nose. And then even judging from this space to where the lips are going to be attached. Right? So it kind of gives us an extra, a quick way of measuring out what is going on within these shapes. Now from here, we want to talk about another shape that I use, which is what we're here for, is the elastic X. So the elastic X is a shape that helps us to build on to our forms and understanding what is going on after we do the Z. So the Z is kind of a super basic structure. Now we want to kind of come over and we want to move over to our model again, and I'm going to take the Van Dyke Z and then make this just a little bit less prevalent. So we're going to take down some of the saturation and the opacity of the Z. Now on here, we're going to use this blank page. We're going to use our red here, going all the way up in red. Okay, so the elastic X, we think about it as it kind of starts in the corner of the eyes, right? Basically, when I say corner of the eyes, essentially where the orbital cavity is going to end, essentially. And then we're going to do these diagonal lines from that corner of the edge of the eye and the orbital cavity to where the wing of the nostril right here connects with that underplane. And that gives us these diagonals that we can check to see the angles. And for the most part, we have our right angle right here. That diagonal is a right angle for the geometry, right? Same as what's going on here. It's a little steeper of an angle. So these are things that we want to train our eye to see on the model as we go. It gives us a way of triangulating these shapes to one another. You can literally see the triangles. Now from the wing of the nostrils, we do not want this to follow the nasolabial fold, which is usually at the top for the most part, almost always, goes into the top part of the wing of the nostrils and filters around like this, because that does not show us the right measuring point that we're going to be using. So you want to be careful not to have this next step follow the nasolabial fold here. So I'm going to get rid of those. We want to think about the corners of the mouth now. We have our corners of our mouth, and we want to extend that elastic X pattern into the corners of the mouth. And I always usually kind of think about what's going on straight across. Now this kind of gives us that structure of having extra measuring points, right? To be able to understand, again, seeing more of the geometry. And so how does that pertain to our sketch? I'll show you guys. We're going to make that just a little bit lighter here. Okay, and we're going to go back to our drawing layer, right? Let me make sure we got the right, yep, okay, cool. Going back to our brown. And when I think about the shapes of what we're going to be doing is we have our orbital cavity right through here. I'm going to take the opacity down in there. We have our movement over here, orbital cavity, that little edge right there, this little edge right through here, just to give you guys an idea, from here to here into the bottom part of the wing of the nostril, like that, and from the other part of the wing of the nostril to the eye to there, right? And so I'm thinking as I'm drawing from the model, what is that angle from there to there? And is my drawing too wide? Does it look good? Is it too steep? How is this angle right here and right here based on what it is I'm seeing as I'm kind of putting the angle over top of the model in a way that I'm kind of visualizing what that angle is from the corner of the eye to the bottom of the wing of the nostril, right? And then we have our right angle here, essentially, right in here. Now, from the corner of the nose, right, to where the mouth sits. What is that angle right in there, and that angle right in there? And how does that connect with the mouth? That looks pretty good from there to there. Kind of gives us an idea. I'm kind of making it a little darker than it should be. And then I'm always thinking about just, where's the mouth come in? How does that link to this middle part of the mouth right through here? And so we can kind of build on these subtleties pretty easily within our sketch. Right, this all gets a little darker because that's that underplane. All right, this is how the mouth comes in and over. What's the distance now from here to here? It looks pretty good. What's the distance from here to here? And so it's another tool for us to triangulate where areas are related to one another. Where does the ear come in? It's pretty much at the top of the brow almost. This comes down and over. Let's see, the ear a little bit taller than the wing of the nostril. And so using the orbital cavities and dropping diagonals down, as well as plumb lines. A lot of people do plumb lines from here to here, where that sits or where this sits, and that all is helpful for the geometry as well. I'm going to do a whole video on the plumb lines as well that I use when I draw, where's the top of the head, you know, so having this measuring point from here to here also helps, from here to here. And so now we have a good sense of how he's going to sit within the space. How does this kind of come in and over? Got the upper lid. What's that space in there doing? That looks pretty good. Now we can test ourselves, which is great on the iPad. It's kind of neat, is to test ourselves. And we can take our initial, I feel like you can get a little wider here, through this way to sketch. What's going on here? The ear is attached to this part. This gets a little darker. And then we have really kind of interesting sense of his mouth looks a little wider because of his mustachio. Right, and so we kind of just build from that initial structure right there, having that established. I'm going to get rid of that real quick. So how does our Elastic X compare to the models? What's kind of neat is we can literally take the Elastic X here from him and overlay it on our sketch, which is the power of the iPad. See how cool this is? The geometry, and we can check to see how our geometry is. Okay, pretty good. So halfway decent. What's really interesting is that we're going to notice how that this geometry can shift and change as well. So that's our Elastic X. Basically, it's called the X because we start in one corner and go to the other, except it's a series of triangles that we're using and diagonals that we're using to see where parts of the features line up, right? So again, here to here, here to here, here to here, and here to here. So I'll show you guys on some other examples as well of how this shape changes based on if it's a profile or if it's straight on. So this is almost a 3/4, but this shape is also really useful if the model changes and shifts. We'll do that in the next one. So just to go over the shape a little bit more, I thought I would do some quick examples of other pieces in different head positions to show you guys how to look for the shape even in a profile, but also kind of show you guys some of my favorite paintings at the same time. Came across this Rembrandt painting that's unfinished, and it's so amazing because you can see the green undertones, right, of the skin tone and his underpainting, and then he's starting to put this fresh, thick paint on top of there, and you can even see the undertones of the imprimatura of the red that he's painting into, getting all his darks in first and then building up the lights. One of my favorite paintings. So just thought I'd point that out really quick, and then we can do our Elastic X, start in the corners of the eyes and the orbital cavity. And then we stretch over down through here, across from the wing of the nostril, just to reiterate, to the other wing of the nostril. Down here, this corner to this corner, causes that shape. Corner of the mouth. Again, we don't want to follow the nasal labial fold. We want to come down from here to here. See the labial folds right here and here. So it doesn't get us to the corner of the mouth exactly. So we want to stay in the corner of the mouth, corner of the wing of the nostrils when they connect, right? And then just straight across will help give us an idea of what these shapes are doing. Again, we want to figure out what this angle is, and how that kind of relates to where the nose starts, and then dropping down this space to this space, and then dropping down and building out that structure, measuring out from where the mouth is going to be. Pretty awesome. And again, we can do a line across here. Now, sometimes it's not perfectly straight line because the head is a cylinder. So we want to think about that as well, that this could have a little bit of a bow to it. Same here, same here. Doesn't have to be perfectly straight. But that shape, again, is very similar to our original shape that we have, where we have this, the thin, and then a little bit larger, and then this angle, this angle, this angle, and this angle. Right through there is kind of what we're looking for. That's our elastic X. One of my favorite paintings, again, is this Diego Velázquez piece of Juan de Pareja, which is in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Highly recommend you go and check it out. And again, corner of the eyes, right? Corner of where the nose is, those wing of the nostrils. We'll do a straight line here, line from this corner to this corner. Our diagonals, corner of the mouth on both sides. And this drops down. And we get that shape again. Again, really thinking about, again, as we come in and zoom in, this shape, this length and diagonal, this diagonal, because these 3/4, this is going to be a shape that's a little bit more steep than this right here, because we're at 3/4. If we're straight on, these become less steep, these shapes, right? So we know that this shape is common for everybody, human beings. If they have 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth, for the most part, this shape will be the same shape. It's just this shape gets thinner, thicker. These angles just change. And so again, this is our chessboard right here, and the pattern of the chessboard changes based on what the moves are and what the pieces are. But we want to think of the overall shape, as ways to have a strategy to measure different spaces. And so it's elastic, right? So it can move and shift and go longer and shorter based on how long the nose is from here to here. It can be, if this distance right here can be smaller or longer again. So this even works within profiles. It gives us 2 measuring points to look at. So we're going to zoom in on Madam X here by John Singer Sargent. And while we're looking at this, it's really cool. Just want to point out another thing really interesting about this painting is the edge condition. Now, if you ever see this painting at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, you'll notice how high she's hung on the wall. We're almost like eye level with just her feet, unfortunately. But what that does is he wanted the face to be really something that came forward into our space. So he made his hardest edges along the line of the face right here. So it was something that you saw even though it was hung high. And so these edges along this edge condition of her forehead, nose, and mouth are very hard edged compared to edges like this, right? So her back shoulder has a lot of a softer transition. And also this transition right here, and we talk about this in some other videos when I talked about softening edges, these soft edges really kind of fall on this idea that this is a form that has a slow slope into the atmosphere of the painting, into the background, whereas the slope on these parts of the painting are a lot more steep. Imagining that if this was 3 dimensions, the nose wouldn't be as thick as the back of the neck, right? So then that would make it have a faster turn into the atmosphere, into the background of the painting. And so that edge is a lot harder of an edge. That, and he also wanted this to be an area that stood out within the painting, obviously. You know, it's the portrait. It's of her. Now, that lesson aside, as we think about our elastic X again, that same shape just changes. We got the corner of the eye, wing of the nose, right? Corner of the mouth. And these shapes all are these diagonals that we're looking for. This length, and this slope. Again, we can do the geometry here. Pretty cool how everything kind of fits together into these triangles and diagonals. And now we can imagine that if this kind of would go in the other side of her face, it would be the same kind of shape just on top of each other, right? So imagining that if we were to do a line through her head to the other side of her mouth that's not in the painting, it would line up exactly with this spot right here. And same with the eye. If she's in a strict profile, which it looks like she is pretty much in a strict profile. So again, that shape that we have, that is basically this shape, changes to, it just kind of rotates, right, into just being this shape right here. And so it's as if this is a three-dimensional shape, not just a two-dimensional shape, right? So if we were to draw this, the shape gets thinner as we go around the face until it's like this if it's going towards the other direction. And a better way to illustrate this is actually to go back to the artist that we started with, which was Van Dyck. And so this is a painting that Van Dyck did of the same individual 3 different ways. Corner of the eye. Let's do the zoom in here really quick. This comes into here, right? Corner of the mouth. From here down to here. Really interesting how this is very stylized portrait. From here to here, this shape will go through the eyes here to the other side, and then we go to this side right here, or eye, corner of the mouth, corner of the mouth. Let's do a straight line through the eyes, and we do those angles. We do the angle. Now, to see the shape, we can turn off the image now. If we isolate these images, right, we see how they shift. This goes all the way out to the nose. This comes down and over, right, in 3 dimensions. It's almost like the profile version of this main shape. And this one gets slightly tilted to the other side. So it's kind of neat to see how the shape shifts between the different angles of the face. But we're still looking for the same points and same measuring spots within our painting. Within the side of the nose, side of the nose. All with this great painting. Now there's one last thing. We call this the elastic X, but I think that we should call it the mocha. Right? If you guys have ever made coffee in Italy, you hopefully will have tried a mocha. So think of the mocha shape. This is exactly the same. Just mocha's got some different proportions. Thanks guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this lesson, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future videos. And if you're interested in taking any in-person workshops with me, just scan the QR code on the screen to see where we're at next, which I believe is actually Urbino, Italy. I want to send a special thanks to everybody supporting the channel via Patreon. You guys really make this possible and I truly appreciate you. And if you haven't already, we have a raffle going on for a painting that I did in Scottsdale, Arizona for hitting 50,000 subscribers. Make sure you check out the link in the description below to enter before it's too late. I'll see you guys in the next video and paint well.